So let's talk about the cerebrum. And here I have a picture of a cerebrum, a brain, with a person looking to your left. And we'll light the cerebrum up so that you can see which part is the cerebrum. And notice how the surface of the cerebrum is convoluted with folds, and this acts to increase the surface area of the cortex on the cerebrum. Some terms you'll come across: gyrus, that's a raised area on the cerebrum, or plural is gyri. And then the grooves are sulci, which is plural. A groove is a sulcus. The grooves that I have lit up are sulci. And that's just so I can show you this, the central sulcus. I'm not going to make you pick this out on a brain, but I wanted you to be aware of the anatomic significance of the central sulcus, because it quite simply divides the brain into two distinct regions: output, which is on the front of the brain, and input, which is in the back of the brain. And we can divide these into lobes. The frontal lobe is involved in planning motor movement and motor movement. The parietal, occipital, and temporal lobe are dedicated to processing input, processing sensation. And so, like I said, the anterior part of the brain, the frontal lobe, is devoted to motor processing, and the back part of the brain is devoted to sensory processing. And you might see this picture of a brain in your reading somewhere, and we're going to take this and expand that. And the first thing I wanted to show you on this picture is the frontal lobe is the part of the forebrain that deals with emotions. That's true. Lots of parts of your brain are dedicated to emotions, but the part of the forebrain that deals with motor planning is the frontal lobe. And what's the difference between emotions and motor planning? Well, one thing I can tell you is, if you think about it, motor planning does require emotional context. And if you look at this gentleman's demise right here, you can see that he has some very complex life and death motor things, some locomotion planning that needs to occur for him to survive. And for him to be able to do this, this does require emotional context, and so the frontal lobe is involved in the emotional context of motor planning. Hopefully that makes sense. Well, I don't know if you've ever heard of a chicken with its head cut off. Cut a chicken's head off, runs around in circles for a little bit before it falls down. And to a neurologist, that reveals to them that the reflexes of running, the reflexes of ambulation are very concentrated in the spinal cord, because the brain is obviously not required for some simple reflexes of ambulation. And so, unfortunately, neurologists have learned a great deal about the brain quite simply by examining the behavior of creatures and people with brain damage. And one of the most revealing histories is Phineas Gage. He worked on the railroads, and people like to talk about Phineas Gage in neuroscience all the time. Well, Phineas Gage had a blasting accident in the mid-1800s. A metal rod was driven through his left cheek and out the top of his head. And here's a cast of his face, and you can see the skull injury. That is his skull that's pictured. And so he had a type of frontal lobotomy due to an accident. So after the accident, Gage's behavior changed. He kind of had the opposite of what we'd expect from a frontal lobotomy. He became inconsiderate, moody, foul-mouthed, and unable to plan ahead. And so they noticed that this injury to his frontal lobe changed his behavior significantly. Notice the unable to plan ahead part. Well, this provided evidence to neurologists that the frontal cortex, which was severely damaged during this accident, is involved in forward planning and behavior. So it's the study of people with frontal lobe injury that led to the frontal lobotomy, a surgical procedure they used to use in the past to treat certain mental illnesses. But the advent of antipsychotic medications made frontal lobotomy unnecessary. Before antipsychotic medications and before frontal lobotomies, nurses who cared for psychotic patients were at very high risk for occupational death. Occupational lethality of being a nurse caring for a mental health patient was very high until the advent of frontal lobotomy and antipsychotics, something you want to keep in mind when you watch One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, which is an excellent movie. Well, I wanted to point to Broca's speech area, since here on the picture it's involved in planning speech. Speech is a motor output, and speech does have an area of the brain that's dedicated to its formation, Broca's area. And so Broca's speech area is involved in the motor planning of speech. People with damage to Broca's speech area cannot properly form words, even though the words they're saying make sense. That's Broca's aphasia. So somebody with Broca's aphasia would sound like this. Have Broca's aphasia. Because the words make sense, but the motor cortex is not actually able to form the words. That's different than a sensory aphasia, a Wernicke's aphasia. Somebody with a Wernicke's aphasia, they are able to form the words properly, but the words that come out of their mouth, the words that are sent to the motor planning area, they're not correct. And so somebody with Wernicke's aphasia, they might say, I have bicycle aphasia. And so people with Wernicke's aphasia, just word salad. People with Broca's aphasia, they have difficulty forming the words. Let's talk about primary motor cortex. This is where the pyramidal system begins. This is where voluntary movement begins in your brain. So cortex means tree bark. This is a picture supposed to denote a slice through the cortex, through the cerebrum, and we're looking at a little piece of it. Cortex is the part on the outside, and cortex just means tree bark. Cortex is what they call gray matter. When you hear people say, use your gray matter, they're talking about the cortex. And the thing to keep in mind is the cortex is made up of cell bodies of neurons. So gray matter is really the collection of cell bodies communicating with each other. It's the white matter that's the collection of axons running their signals from the cell bodies to other cell bodies. So keep in mind, white matter is axon fibers of neurons. So there's two types of gray matter that you're going to talk about in neuroscience. When the gray matter, the neuron cell bodies are on the surface of a structure, it's called cortex. The cerebrum is a major, is really the only place you're going to find cortex. Cerebellum has cortex too, but when people refer to cortex, they're talking about that outer layer on your cerebrum, which is where a lot of processing occurs in a human brain. But not all the cell bodies of neurons are on the outside of the cerebrum or out the outside of the cerebellum. They're inside of the brain, surrounded by white matter, and we call them nuclei. And again, they're just collections of neuron cell bodies. The thalamus, the basal ganglia, the cranial nerve nuclei, the spinal gray nuclei, those are all gray matter embedded in the brain, surrounded by white matter. And keep in mind that white matter is just neuron axons. You'll hear them called tracks, pathways, nerves, fibers, columns. These are all axons carrying the signals from one cell body to another. some of those axons and pathways can be 3 feet long. The neurons that start in your primary motor cortex go all the way down to your spinal cord. And so those axons can be up to 3 feet long if you're really tall. So in the gray matter of this primary motor cortex, they looked at it under the microscope and saw these pyramid-shaped cell bodies, hence the name pyramidal system. Because these pyramid-shaped cell bodies have very long axons that go all the way to the spinal cord. They carry that voluntary muscle signal coming from your brain, and so these are the cell bodies of upper motor neurons. So the motor system begins in the primary motor cortex. Because of the pyramid-shaped cells, the motor system is called the pyramidal system. These pyramidal motor neurons that begin in the primary motor cortex and end up in the spinal cord, these pyramidal motor neurons are also called upper motor neurons. Your book might talk about all sorts of other upper motor neurons, but in a clinical setting, the neuron fibers that come from the primary motor cortex and go down into the spinal cord and carry voluntary muscle signal, those clinically are what we call the upper motor neurons. Alright, so I showed you the central sulcus dividing the output side of the brain to the input side of the brain. And I showed you the lobes of the cerebrum. I want to draw your attention to the frontal lobe, which is anterior to the central sulcus. And notice that the primary motor cortex is on a gyrus of the frontal lobe. And that's also called the precentral gyrus. Because that central sulcus, that's the precentral gyrus. And you might hear it called the motor strip as well, or motor cortex. So all these terms get used to describe this motor cortex. Let's take a coronal section. We're going to take a slice through the motor strip, and we're going to look at a slice of the brain looking straight on a coronal section. And so here is a coronal section of the brain, and I wanted to look at the left and right motor strips on this cartoon. And each motor strip controls the opposite side of the body. That's why people who have injury to this side of their cerebrum, if they have injury to this side of their motor strip, they're going to be paralyzed on the opposite side of the body and vice versa. If they have injury to this side of their motor strip, then they're paralyzed on the other side of the body. So each motor strip controls the opposite side of the body. Something interesting about the primary motor cortex is it is somatotopically arranged. Somato, body, topic, map. There's a body map on your cerebral cortex. There is a body map on the primary motor cortex. And the reason that we talk about this is notice how much motor cortex is dedicated to facial expression and moving your mouth, moving your lips, moving your tongue so you can make words. That's why that face takes up so much space on the motor cortex. And notice that face is sitting in the same place that Broca's area was. And so further down on the motor strips are where control our face. We know this because of a neurosurgeon, Walter Penfield, I believe, anesthetized the patients were awake but given pain medication and with parts of their skulls removed, Penfield could localize each part of the cortex and see what it was developed to. Notice the ankle doesn't really take up much space at all, but notice the genitalia is down in the center of each cerebrum, down in something called the limbic cortex, and we're going to talk about the limbic cortex in just a little bit.